is Primus Tracks with Josh, Frankie, and Soya.
What a couple of dumb shits. Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! At Primus Tracks on Instagram and Threads. PrimusTracksPod@gmail.com is the email address. Frankie maintains a Facebook page called, appropriately, Primus Tracks. And, of course, if you have a question for Tim Soya, call or text 337-514-7692. Speaking of Soya, Frankie couldn't make it this time, but Soya was game to help us out as we welcome back David Lefkowitz for our third edition of the Masterclass series, in which we discuss the pork soda era leading into prawn song / sausage. Please enjoy our talk with Mr. David Lefkowitz. We are, of course, joined by Tim Soya and the heaviest of the heavies, as Soya calls him, David Lefkowitz. Dave, I think you're actually really in an enviable position in this regard. You go to all the greatest shows. You know so many great artists and people. The fans have mostly no idea who you are. You can walk around. I don't know. Do you get mobbed?
I don't. It's funny. I just before you turned the video on, I was mentioning that I went to see Frog Brigade in Philly last Wednesday at the Fillmore Philly, which I actually used to work out of. You know, I also mentioned that I went to the Les VIP Q&A and that he called me out. So that was a rare moment when, I don't know how many people go to those VIPs, like 50 or less or something. Mm-hmm. However many people were there, all knew who I was. I mean, just that I was the former manager. I don't know if people knew who the former manager was or whatever, but, it was fine. Some guy's like, you must have some stories to tell.
Did you sign autographs and get high fives?
No, sir. I don't think I've ever done that.
I've had to sign Primus stuff as Tim Sawyer when they find out who I am. It happens. It's
Awesome.
kind of funny. I'm like, are you sure? I'm not signing C's of Cheese, dude. I'm not. No.
It's different than remember we talked about the whole Trows segment of the first home video. It started out with me just spontaneously singing some lyrics to an orchestra that was playing in Venice, Italy, in the plaza.
Well, that'll get you some notoriety. Tell everybody you're that guy. Well, that's cool that you have that, I think, anonymity. And I can tell you that's related is one of our listeners who interacts a lot with the podcast let us know that I went to that Napa show. My dad went to high school with Les, and so we were backstage. I was meeting some people and talking to him, and I was standing next to this guy, and I said to him, so do you have an affiliation with the Frog Brigade? And he said, well, I put on the show. My name's David Lefkowitz. And our pal was beside himself because he's listened to your episodes. So I think.
Oh, cool.
So there's a little bit there.
Nice guy. Yeah, definitely. I remember meeting him. That was such a great homecoming of a lot of old kind of Les and Primus fans from the earliest days. I mean, Flapjacks, who, has always been around, a great friend like Clem Donahue and just a bunch of people. Flounce and Fred, obviously.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Cool. Wish I was there, man. I was out of town, of course.
Yeah. That was
Good
like
time.
May 18th or something. I can't remember if it was the very first Frog show or if maybe they started a few days prior to that, but it was the first show for our venue.
Yeah, that got your season going in great fashion.
It
And
really
these shows,
did.
Yeah. These shows have been just praised coast to coast. People are having a great time.
I was impressed when I saw it in LA, man. Dave, I said it to Les after. I said, dude, that was fucking awesome, dude. Because I don't get into any of his jam band stuff. And some of these bands get so convoluted and I just don't get into it. I was impressed at the Wiltern this year when I saw the show. I told him, and he actually stopped me and said, dude, that means a lot, dude. That coming from Soya.
It's interesting because I think you guys just did an episode on Live Frogs set 1 and 2, right?
Yes.
I wasn't on that one, but yes, they did. You guys did, right?
I need to hear that because I have a lot of great memories and, I couldn't have been more involved, and everything.
I was there. I was the dude that set up all the gear for both those nights.
At Great American Music Hall?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Derek Featherstone was there.
Todd and Jay and Jeff Kameny on keys and Scarrick was there. Jay Lane.
And I mean, it kind of relates to what we're about to talk about because Sausage as a band was part of that band. The whole Sausage band was in there.
Yeah, they were half the band, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
And the fact that they, were playing, there were no Frog Brigade albums yet, other,
Right.
of original material. So you got your Sausage material, your Holy Mackerel, your Pink Floyd.
The Pink Floyd Animals side was in there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe some other random covers like King Crimson and stuff like that.
Right.
But this time around, heavily dependent on the Frog Brigade and Les Claypool albums of the 2000s, which I was involved with most of those, up until 2007. I felt like I didn't really need to hear that material quite as much personally. The Animals thing blew my mind. And then like all this other stuff, like I've never seen the Delirium live before. I saw Les and Sean and his girlfriend, Sean's girlfriend, do a trio performance at Sweetwater for this benefit back in 2016, which was pretty cool. But Sean sang a Delirium song on Wednesday night. I think it's called Blood and Rockets. Very cool.
Okay.
Definitely the most melodic song of the night. And they covered Mirror in the Bathroom by the English Beat, which was incredible.
They played most every night on the tour, and it's been received quite well. It was quite a surprise, of course.
Wow. Yeah. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, let's segue into our pork soda and sausage eras. That's where we left off the last time we spoke. And of course, thank you for coming back. It means a lot. We'll start with this. The cheese cycle ends. Miscellaneous debris is sprinkled in there. Lots of great tours and public appearances. MTV even comes calling. When they go into the studio to start recording Pork Soda, in the book you mentioned that Caesar Cheese went gold by the time Pork Soda was released. Also in the book, Tim Alexander hinted that there was more pressure making Pork Soda, and I'm curious, was that external pressure, internal pressure? Did you feel any of that going into the studio after this build?
Interscope, as I'm sure I've mentioned and others have, was a very unique situation for us, and maybe the only label that we could have had total creative control with. But people's careers are like on the line and stuff like that, and it was still like a new company. I mean, granted, it wasn't nearly as new as when Caesar Cheese came out. I mean, we were like literally the second album they ever released. It wasn't the Interscope that everybody knows today. So they really wanted to succeed. Now, as I probably mentioned on the last time I was on, the whole thing about SoundScan was started right when Caesar Cheese came out, and we were on the Heat Seekers chart, which meant that you couldn't be in the top 100, et cetera, et cetera. So, we plodded along, selling 1,000 to 2,000 albums a week for 2 years, doing all these bigger and bigger tours. And now we have 500,000 American record-buying fans, and Pork Soda comes out. And I don't remember the number of albums that we sold the first week, but it was enough for the album to debut in the top 10 albums.
Right.
For a band that hadn't been in the top 100 before. That was how they qualified to be on Heat Seekers. So
and they were barely commercially acceptable other than Jerry was a race car driver,
Yeah. But, it's interesting. I've heard Les say this twice now in the meet and greets. Primus got so much support from MTV, and it was such a big deal. Not to sound like an old fart, but like, big difference between like, my generation and the generation of today is that, the media was so consolidated. There were 3 or 4 TV networks. Everybody watched the same stupid sitcoms and talked about it at school the next day, stuff like that. There was like 3 or 4 magazines, depending on what kind of music you listened to. There was no internet. So the point is that MTV was so consolidated. And if you had a show like Headbangers Ball, if you were into metal, you watched Headbangers Ball. If you were into, other weird kinds of stuff or alternative music, in its various forms, you watched 120 Minutes with Matt Pinfield, And then there was Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
Thank God. Man. I mean, as dumb as that show was, they played everything we did. And did that start around the Pork Soda time? I can't remember.
I believe so. And of course, the Poetry and Prose track made it onto that CD.
Liquid TV was going on.
Oh, yeah.
Liquid Television. Yeah.
Oh, is that what?
And that was MTV.
That's right. And then, of course, it morphed into, this Beavis and Butthead series, and they showed music videos, and Primus ended up on that soundtrack.
Right. In
CD.
fact, somebody at the VIP the other night asked Les if he would ever consider playing the song Poetry and Prose live. And he's like, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Probably for a good reason.
A lot of shit goes on, man, in your career when you're like a Primus. You just keep going and going and going. You forget about shit.
I am curious about that element of pressure because this band had built up and had support from MTV. So I'm curious if the record label, of course, they're watching and they see this build and they see that the band is successful and selling a lot of albums, even if it's only a couple thousand a week. Was there pressure that you recall for a single, using air quotes, or something that could garner radio play, or a video that could be shown on MTV?
It's interesting because obviously we no longer had like Tommy the Cat in our back pocket.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were a few songs from Suck on This that, hadn't been recorded in the studio yet and whatever. But they weren't exactly radio hits, Right. And then that brings you to the point that, what were the beginnings of the song My Name is Mud? I have no idea. Like, when was that, first played live? Had anybody ever heard that before the album came out?
I only heard it when Laurel Pine played it at a Victims Family show at the Phoenix Theater right before we went on, kind of thing. The advanced, copy as a promoter. And she's like, I got it. I'm going to play it. We're going to debut the new Primus right before Victims Family goes on. We're sold out, 1,200 people in the Phoenix Theater, and it's like, we're like, what the fuck is this, man? Where's Tommy the Cat? This is the bass line. And whatever the case, it took off and everybody loved it. We're like, all right, pork soda. There you go.
Compared to Jerry Was a Race Car Driver, was it that song had a hard time getting on radio, but because Interscope stuck with it for over a year, like nobody else would have, gotten a lot of radio play. But, My Name is Mud definitely got radio play probably more easily, kind of all at once because of the groundwork that had been laid by the previous album and its various, singles or whatever, and then I'm sure the video got a lot of airplay. Was that on Beavis and Butthead?
I can't remember if it was on Beavis and Butthead specifically, but it definitely got plenty of play, during Weird Music Time on MTV, I suppose.
I definitely saw that video on TV traveling around with VF on tours. Like, we're like, oh, fuck, there's Primus. Oh, yeah, here it is. My Name is Mud.
Yeah, so one thing I was going to say that Les has said at a couple of these VIP things is how even Kirk Hammett would say to him, how the hell did you guys get on MTV? We haven't even really gotten on MTV yet. It's a weird thing. Primus obviously wasn't comfortably fitting in with anything.
Yeah.
But they somehow could kind of fit in a little bit with lots of things, which is weird. More so than the biggest metal band on the planet. I guess so. Metallica was a way bigger band in terms of everything. Ticket sales, radio play, probably.
If you go back to that time, we're talking about when One was the Metallica video, that thing exploded on MTV, whereas Primus had the Jerry Was a Race Car Driver video kind of like was always on. And then My Name is Mud came out and I kind of got foreshadowed by that Metallica moment, just saying like Kirk trying to say, Les, how did you guys get on there? And all of a sudden Metallica just fucking took over,
Well, sure,
it's like, at that exact moment, you might have said that to Les,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Right before the Black Album came out and Enter Sandman was on every 20 minutes.
Oh, that was Injustice. Well, Injustice for All, that one was on every 20 minutes for a while there,
Yeah, so just getting that respect of having the record debut before we even had to do anything. I can't remember the timing of, if there was a single out, if Mud was the first single. I don't remember any of that, but
yeah,
Mud was definitely the first single.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, it's the first real song on the record. That really kicked things off, pretty nicely. And then, I assume that we had Lollapalooza lined up before the record came out. Okay. And did I already talk about kind of the origins of how we got that tour?
You did mention Don Mueller and Mark Geiger and Perry and Ted Gardner were the partners in Lala. I remember you saying that. Sure. And it's in the book too, but just the idea that you were able to get Primus on there was obviously huge for 93. Soya said something a while ago to me, and he said, it's not who you are, it's who you know. And that, I think, applies right here in the music industry for in a way for Primus to get on Lollapalooza and get out there to a wider audience.
Well, obviously, we had opened for Jane's Addiction
right
in the UK, whatever year that was, 1990 probably. They'd wanted to take us on the whole tour of Europe, and we didn't have the money. But so we kind of knew Ted Gardner because I can't remember if he was officially the manager at that point, but he was definitely the road manager back in 1990. But by 93, he was the founding partner of the festival and manager of Jane's Addiction, who I guess had sort of retired as a band at that point by 93, right? Because 91 was the last, that first Lolla tour was the last Jane's tour for many years. And I may have mentioned this on the show before, but in 1993, in the spring, for some reason, Trows and I went to Orlando, Florida, to the Performance Magazine conference, a now defunct concert industry trade publication that kind of rivaled industry standard Polestar back in the day. And I wasn't even going to Polestar conference every year, but for some reason we just decided we were going to go. I guess we were just getting our management partnership going, like the Prawn song releases were upcoming with Charlie Hunter that we were working on together and stuff like that. And I remember Ted Gardner was on a panel, and Trows, being the road manager guy, had kind of bonded with Ted to some degree, probably more than I knew Ted. And the two of us went up to Ted after the panel, and we were like, hey, what's it going to take for Primus to be on Lollapalooza this summer? And I can't remember what he said, but it indicated that they had already decided that it was happening.
Oh,
and
wow.
That was the first time
right.
we were like, what? Like,
that's so cool.
He didn't say like, you've got it or whatever, but he's like,
it's in our brains, bro. We're already thinking about that was our choice kind of vibe. Like, you're like, wow, we were trying to like put this to you and you're already thinking about it. It's on.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Don Muller thing was the main thing for that, being our agent, co-founder of the festival, major decision maker on who was on the tour. Geiger had been, attached at the hip with Don, since day one from our experience. And, they went to multiple companies together, started some companies together and stuff like that. So at that point, that was really great. And obviously it's been said a million times, Alice in Chains was the bigger band. They were the biggest band on the bill, and they specifically refused to close the show. And so we were like, we'll close the show, no problem, and that meant that a lot of people would be leaving during the Primus set, and that was fine.
Yeah. So you found that to be the headlining gig was desirable. I mean, obviously on all the bills and everything, Primus is going to be on the top. That was a trade-off you were willing to make.
Yeah. There's something to be said for positioning on bills. It's like a huge deal in festivals to this day, where's the name on the poster? Right. Coachella agonizes over the order on the poster, But for something like that played like every major city in America for, 6 weeks or whatever, I'm sure we made a lot of fans by them actually seeing Primus play at the show. But I'm sure a lot of people maybe first heard of the band when they were like looking at the poster going, what? Who's that?
Yeah. As Les calls it, we bit the bullet and took the parking buffer.
Right.
Exactly.
A lot of people got to get out of there before the people left that stayed to see us.
I guess it's worth talking about the Mud video for a second.
Yeah,
which
please.
Maybe you guys have done. And obviously we'd been working with Mark Core for a couple albums already by that point. I remember being at the video shoot, and I've looked for this site many times since then. So it's basically Highway 280 in Northern California, parallels 101. It's kind of more of not exactly a rural highway, but it's not like the, civilized freak show that is Highway 101. So yeah, there was some just, area right off 280, somewhere in the sort of Palo Alto, Menlo Park area. Could have been a little south or a little north. I can't remember. And that crazy tree, was there. So I always look for that tree when I'm driving up 280, which I did in May with my daughter.
Did you see it?
In June. No, I mean, there's a couple of trees where you're like, it's probably that one, but it's hard to know. I was there.
It's pretty epic, the silhouette of that tree in the video.
Oh yeah.
With the one kick drum and snare and one cymbal. And
and I don't know what the camera lens technique was, or whatever, that makes it seem all, those weird close-ups. And then of course the mud bath segment.
Yep.
Which I specifically remember was filmed in Calistoga. I don't think I was there that day, but it was Bob Koch, Adam Gates, in one of the mud baths, and then it was Big Rick Stewart,
who was from Live 105 was there.
Yeah,
I never met that dude. I don't know him, so
he was a larger guy. So he's still a Bay Area DJ now. In fact, he might be up in wine country somewhere on a commercial station.
I think so.
But he was on Live 105 for many years, which was the big modern rock or alternative rock radio station in the Bay Area. But he actually preceded, his interest in Primus preceded my involvement in the band, and goes way back to Primate.
Dude, CG worked at Live 105, and that's kind of how Primus got shooed into Big Rick. Was CG said, dude, my buddy Les, they had that apartment in San Pablo, which is when I met him. When I started working for Primus in '88.
Yeah, Les was telling me about Curtis the other night, his latest successes in science. But yeah, Big Rick supposedly played like maybe the Primate demo or one of the earliest demos on the air at a radio station that had actually gone under before I even moved to the Bay Area. It was called the Quake.
I remember Quake.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know, 8.6 maybe?
I don't think it goes above 107, does it?
107.9 is the highest position on your FM dial, as far as I remember.
It was way high above. It was above 106 KMEL.
Wow. So maybe 107, but yeah. So he was in that video, and that was definitely a video that got a lot of attention. I mean, it wasn't exactly easy subject matter.
Right. So you said something that interests me. Is the band's manager normally at a video shoot, or were you there of your own volition and interest for some of these?
I would say probably so. I mean, everybody was in the Mr. Crinkle video, including me and my brother.
Yeah. Do you remember what you guys do in that video?
So, that video, I'm sure you guys have discussed it before, but it's one shot.
Yep.
So for 4.5 minutes, it had to go perfectly. And I think they only shot it 3 times.
Because of the guy on fire. Yeah.
Yeah, there was like fire and, all kinds of crazy choreography. And my first assistant, who had long moved on by that point, Shannon Bell, a.k.a. Rock Cod.
Yes.
Had many a success in her career since then. Was the costume person for the Crinkle video, and she actually has made a career, studying like costume design, and she's like been a teacher and an administrator of universities, doing this kind of thing, and museums in New York and stuff like that. But so my character in that Crinkle video is sort of based on a little snippet from the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. There are the fairy tale segments. I forget the name of the guy. Aesop. Fractured fairy tales. Yeah. Oh. And so at the end of those, there would be this sort of heavy set woman with kind of a flowy dress, kind of throwing the flower petals as she walked from a basket.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the little janitor guy sweeping up behind her, and that was me. So there was
okay. So I remember the guy. Yeah, I remember the guy pushing the broom. Yeah. That was you.
I think I have like a lollipop in my mouth and a baseball hat on and like a one piece. What do you call those work overalls? Yeah. So I thought that was kind of a cool symbolism moment of like me cleaning up after Primus.
Fitting.
That's amazing, dude. I never noticed that in watching that video.
But my brother, who just happened to be in town and had really long black hair, he's only a year and a half younger than me, is one of the 2 people carrying Bob Koch on the platform.
Yes.
In fact, I think he's the one in the front. So Bob's like literally whipping him.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I mean, Chaney and her sister Mira are twins, and they did the girls from The Shining, and
right.
Yeah. A lot of crazy stuff. Lur's got the crazy like 80s hair metal guy.
Heavy metal, hair metal guitar player in it.
Yeah. And then they have to like wheel in like Herb on like this drum riser and stuff. It was all choreographed. It was so amazing.
Yeah. That was quite an achievement. And I have agitated on this podcast for a long time for that film reel to be rescanned in 4K, get some color correction on it, throw it on YouTube, and just blow people's minds. I would love to see that.
I wonder if Cage.
And where are all the extras that were not used?
Right.
Oh, sure. There's 3 takes of it, right?
Yeah.
That'd be cool to see too. Why not?
They're probably where the sausage tapes are from.
Yes, that old mystery. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the videos, and because Mud and Crinkle are quite memorable. Crinkle being my absolute favorite of all of them. DMV not so much. It's just the label wanted it. I remember, and Les
wasn't in that video. I can't even remember.
It's footage of them at the Greek, like setting up for the show and playing the show, and then there's interstitials of monkeys on tricycles or washing cats and all kinds of goofy stuff that, and some cartoony things that also go with the lyrics. It was one of those live show type videos, and Les wasn't ever too thrilled with it, as I recall him saying. But with these videos, in your role, how do you negotiate for a music video budget? And I assume you enter into that somehow. And Les, of course, over the years has always made them as cheap as possible because he was never given that much money in the first place. But I'm curious how you take on that conversation with the label, because I assume it's the label that wants a video, and so you have to negotiate a budget.
You know, I'm sure every manager's role is totally unique, and every, artist is totally unique. In this situation, I mean, Les was, the driver of all creativity, as far as like how to kind of like finances and business kind of get affected by that. So in this particular instance of these major label video budgets, I mean, the budgets at the time across the board were pretty high. I mean, I can't remember what Winona's cost, but I'm sure that was an extreme case. I mean, had to have been more than $100,000. Wow.
But Jimmy Iovine was behind it, so that's
true.
Needed.
Exactly. So they were willing to spend whatever it took, for that. But, not like, I don't think Mud was that extravagant or Crinkle, budget wise. But, over the years, I mean, I can kind of remember Les having, maybe 2 or 3 totally different ideas for the same video. And he'd kind of have to choose one. In fact, I can't remember how much Primus went through this type of process, but over the years with a lot of other bands that I managed, the video promotion department of the label would send a song out to multiple video directors or their representatives. And then these guys would pitch themselves as the potential director for the video, and they would write up a whole treatment, Wow. And I don't know how many times Les took anybody else's treatment. I mean, usually it was all coming from him. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember at what point this was or what song, but I mean, I kind of, can remember him and Tom Wally, our A&R guy at Interscope, really kind of discussing the scope of the project. And I wasn't really involved in the creative part, but then it would get to like, okay, well, now it's going to cost, X. And there might be some negotiation because different things that labels would spend money on were recoupable from the band's royalties. And any record deal could be negotiated in and of itself. Maybe there were some industry standards. If you had your own, negotiating leverage, you could get a better deal and this and that. But like if you had like an independent publicist or an independent, commercial radio promotion company, some of that stuff could be recoupable out of your royalties. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you're a record company. Shouldn't you have a publicity department and a radio promotion department? Like, why do you need to go spend our money to supplement your staff? But sometimes that, would have to happen. If I recall correctly, I think the industry standard was that videos were 50% recoupable out of your royalties. But maybe in the in their minds, depending on the timing and the success of the band and what else was going on, what they were spending money on as a label, maybe that would be like 50% recoupable up to a certain number. Okay. And if you're saying you have to go with this crazy creative concept that's actually going to cost an insane amount of money, well, then maybe Tom would come to me and say, Les wants to do this, but it's going to cost X. So we're willing to pay the 50% up to this amount, and then it's all on you guys. And then I'd have to go to Les and sit with him and whatever. So
does a video like DMV, where it's just them filming the crew and the band at some venue, the Great Theater, which you could tell there's no budget, and that's very cheap to do that video, versus, My Name is Mud or Crinkle, which is full on fucking production, I mean, are those like bones you throw to say, okay, well, Les didn't like that video, but he knew they had to do a very low budget video to accommodate the next single that Interscope wanted to put out, which was DMV,
Yeah. I mean, you think about the fact that like we put out Miscellaneous Debris as a way to continue to promote Seas of Cheese.
Right.
Right. It was a promotional tool, even though it was a completely separate recording.
Which totally worked.
So in a sense, obviously the videos are doing that, especially if it's the third video, on the record, you're trying to extend the life of the project. So, you're not necessarily looking to change popular culture with that one. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the visuals, though, it's really worth talking about the film that Les created, or the series of short films that Les created for the backdrops of the live show.
Right.
And for Lollapalooza. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember which songs. I mean, the one that stands out in my mind is the song Bob.
Uh-huh.
Yep. With the swinging lights.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
It's these light bulbs on like a rope, and they're just swinging, and the shadows are just moving all around and everything. And
they still use that footage. Yeah. There's a bunch they still use. Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, maybe My Name is Mud, they used parts of the video.
Right.
I'm trying to remember, what else could have been on there for the film. And I'm looking at the song list now. I mean, I just have no idea.
Well, I do remember in the book, Les said they, strapped a really expensive anamorphic lens camera to his boat and were zipping around the bay. And that made Mark Core very nervous, because I'm sure that camera was, cost more than most people's houses at the time.
Yeah.
So they did get a lot of more or less ambient footage, but some other things that they may have staged for those projections at Lollapalooza. So they actually went. That's really cool that you guys went above and beyond. You made some music videos to promote, but then you also, knowing you're going to be headlining Lolla, take it to the next step and do something out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember more about those live shows. It's just been such a long time. My memory's not that great. Obviously there was the famous moment on, I don't know if it was the very last show of the tour, Les jumps out during the Alice in Chains performance of that song, Rooster or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and he's in the chicken suit. Yeah. Good stuff.
And then a bunch of guys from Alice in Chains jumped out during Primus. I think they all had bases, and they were doing like a bouncing knee kind of a thing, like trying to imitate Les or whatever. But
that's great.
I don't know. Soya, you weren't on that tour?
Negative. I was on Victim's Family that year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this, the songs on Pork Soda, and there's a lot of these little like in between things, like Pork Chop's little ditty, and
right.
Wounded Knee is Herb's thing. It's cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
He had set up his own music publishing company just for that one song.
Yeah. And so we should also, though, give credit to Matt Wheeler, who did the light show that went along with what they were doing. He recently passed, and Les memorialized him on Instagram, so people would know who he was, but he goes pretty far back. You guys knew him pretty well, sounds like, and he was a key cog for quite some time and helped make that Lolla experience great for the fans.
I think he was a friend of Lurs from high school.
That was mentioned in the book, and I was interested in that. So he goes way back. Like, he's high
he
school
goes
buddies with Larry.
back before everybody. But just the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet, just the happiest guy, no matter what was going on. Big deadhead.
Yeah, that's how my wife met him, was when she worked for Bill Graham Presents at Dead shows. She would meet him in the parking lot when she was working for BGP. And he knew all of her friends who worked for BGP. So he was kind of in the tighter circle of, come over here. We've got your passes. Let's go. And they were just really good friends through that,
When Larry did the Frank Zappa cover band with Brain, Merv, and House from the Limbo Maniacs, which was called Kaka, Matt was in the band. Like, it was the only time I really ever saw him on stage doing the vocals that Frank Zappa would do, which would be one of the vocalists, of that material.
Yeah.
Although now that I think about it, the first time I ever saw Matt Wheeler was on a stage way back at the I-Beam during a Primus set. And I don't know if they had rehearsed this. I can't imagine, but he got up and they did the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin.
Oh, wow.
A lot of fun in those early days. But yeah, actually there's a speaking of the I-Beam, there's a YouTube video that came up in my feed of the Limbo Maniacs. There's not a lot of Limbo Maniacs material out there because they only had the one record, even though Bootsy Collins and Maceo Parker were on it. But there's a YouTube video of the Limbos with an early Buckethead sitting in with them. It's like a Limbo Maniacs encore, and they did this Miles Davis song from the 80s, real funky rock kind of Miles Davis song. And Bucket's up there. He's not even wearing a bucket. He's wearing like the Deli Creeps apron.
Yeah, sure.
Weird plastic masks and just trying to solo over the Miles Davis. It's pretty cool.
Amazing.
Well, so these extras, we'll call them extras, for the live shows. The band's always pushing boundaries, and we know Les is a kind of an influence behind that. But to have that outlay to bring in new fans, you're in your role managing the band. I mean, is there a time that you have to say no, because clearly you said yes to all? You're like, yeah, we can do that. Why not? First of all, you did it on the do it on the cheap. Well, let's get Matt. He's seen the Dead 200 times. He can do a light show, which is outstanding. I love the philosophy behind that. But is there a point at which you have to go, I don't know if we can do that?
I mean, Les called the shots creatively, and that meant that the finances were dictated to some degree at different times. His creative self-confidence had a lot of positive financial implications in terms of, like, we never did a publishing deal. So instead of making 75% of the money from the songwriting, we made, 100% in US and Canada and 90%, worldwide or whatever.
Nice.
Because somebody has to collect your money outside the US and Canada. And on the flip side of that was, like, maybe every once in a while there was like a, huge video budget or, a film budget. Or I'm looking at the Greek Theater from 1993 right now on YouTube just to remind myself of, some of these backdrops. The giant wooden letters that spell out, I guess, is it Primus or Pork Soda or both on the cover. That was part of one of the films. I mean, so that couldn't have been very expensive. But yeah, I mean, playing upright bass on some stuff. I mean, it was definitely not your average alternative rock show at the time.
Right. That's of interest to me, and I know it's getting into the weeds and getting into nitty gritty, but for some reason, those talks that you would have behind the scenes are just figuring out what you can do, what you can't do, what the label will support, what they'll definitely say no to, is of interest to me, because I'm sure there are a lot of ideas that were either nixed straight away or after some negotiation reduced in scope because you really wanted to swing for the fences at some points. But of course, it's a dance. I'm curious, and this may be a convoluted way of asking it, but Pork Soda debuts at number 7 on the Billboard charts. First of all, I just wonder if that was a shocker to you guys in that camp at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we had high hopes, but I don't think anybody imagined it would be that great.
Okay. And so because of that result, I just wonder if that helped you along with maybe with some negotiations down the line for budgets for videos. I do recall in the book you did say you guys were able to renegotiate the record deal after the success of Pork Soda.
Yeah, and just to take one step back really quick, I mean, I mentioned the concept that the band wasn't going to do a publishing deal. Les mentioned this at the VIP thing the other day, which was that, our first lawyer at the time came to us, and, it was a pretty modest advance in the larger scheme of things. I mean, I can't remember how much money it was. Let's say it was $100,000, to sign away 25% of your songwriting income for a really long period of time, like a decade or more, and he said basically like, well, in order for you guys to lose money on this deal, you'd have to sell more than like 100,000 copies of one record. I mean, do you really think you're going to sell more than 100,000 copies? And Les, says to this day that, at the time he's like, well, I don't know. It sure seems like a lot of albums will probably never sell that much, but like, let's just hedge our bets and not do the deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember going back to when Faith No More, The Real Thing, came out. And even though we'd kind of watched Metallica already be huge, those were like kind of closer friends of ours. And Les and I went in the studio and they were recording whatever, and I remember them telling us like, we're spending all this money on videos for this album and whatever else was happening. And he's like, maybe it was Puffy or whoever said, for us to make any money off the royalties, of course, over and above an advance that they got and the recording budget and whatever else, we have to sell 1 million, copies. And then they did, So think about it from perspective of both the band wanting to make more money after recouping all the stuff, the marketing expenses and so forth. And the label wanting to know that they had more money to spend to keep making the band bigger, not to mention that their jobs were secure because they bet on the right horse and, all this kind of stuff.
Oh, sure.
For an album to, debut at number 7, it's like instantaneous, labels
on your side. You vested it. They did the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that certainly started the whole album cycle off in a big way. Mm-hmm. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but, as a contrast to the Seas of Cheese album cycle where we opened for bigger and bigger bands and spent 2 years and like, a lot of tour support money from the label to keep opening, to be able to afford to keep opening for these bands and putting on Miscellaneous Debris and just really stretching that thing out.
Yeah.
Pork Soda comes out and, maybe, most of 93 was touring for that. I can't remember if it went into 94 or not, but then obviously Sausage comes out and it's just like total changing of gears,
Right.
So it was not a 2-year album cycle for Pork Soda. It
was a little over a year. Yeah. Number 7 on the charts, making videos. Things are looking fantastic. Did all of these events change the way that you manage the band at all? Because it would seem to me that all of a sudden I might not get stars in my eyes, but I might think, holy cow, we're in the big leagues now.
I don't think it really changed the way. I mean, I think we all kind of respected each other at the time.
Okay.
Doing their job well. I mean, I think the manager is probably the easiest one to, kind of pick off and say, well, what did you really do? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not making the music or recording the music or anything, you know? But there's obviously a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. And, to have started from such small beginnings and to have, helped guide it through all these different things, even just lining up the team with the agent and, the eventual lawyer and stuff like that. Managing the finances, not to mention the fact that, 1993 was when we got Prawn Song Records going as an independent label to sign, our friends' bands and stuff like that. So that was a whole thing, which maybe we've talked about that before to some extent.
I'll have questions about it later for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, things were definitely going well. I did have this transition from the early lawyer to the second lawyer, who was a bigger time LA guy, who definitely worked with the Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction and a bunch of, artists and companies and stuff like that. Okay. And it was somebody that I had kind of known personally a little bit. And then randomly I find out like he'd been recommended to Les, totally like independent of my relationship. And we started working with him on the label, Prawn Song.
Yeah.
And then as this notion of like being able to renegotiate the album deal started to come to the fore, that was kind of a good transition to kind of move over to this lawyer for all the Primus business, because he knew how to renegotiate a label deal, basically, which was a huge moment for all of us, for sure.
And that would be a monumental task, I think, to take on by yourself to a degree. So, so finding that person that has that experience is really important. And these are the things that, I'm a music fan and I'm mostly about the music, but these are things I don't think about, but it helps paint the entire picture of how did this goofball band, this weird band, make it, to this point that they had this regular airplay. And these are all really important pieces of that. And another piece that's really important, and we talked about it a bit earlier, but now Primus is doing all these extras. They're doing poetry and prose for the Beavis and Butthead CD. The videos are being shown like crazy on that show already. They cut this extra song. And then there's Bastardizing You Like It, which they cut for the Airheads soundtrack. So now we're doing all these different extras. And that's not something that the band had done before. So I'm curious, they're not putting a song on Cheers or Home Improvement, but Beavis and Butthead is a big deal at the time. What is, does the band get to choose where to direct these tracks, or are the TV shows or producers coming to them for these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly coming through the label. Now, the interesting thing is I mentioned this publishing deal concept a couple of times, and the idea behind a publishing company is that although you're giving them 25% of your money, they're hopefully helping to increase the income overall.
Yeah.
They're coming up with opportunities. So, whether it's the label or the publishing company or both, or, maybe other people too, the manager, are pitching people, and we didn't have the publishing company, which was great because we got more opportunities without a publishing company than most bands got with a publishing company. And a lot of that was because of Interscope. I mean, certainly the success of the band was largely because of Interscope. And maybe that was the main driver. Sometimes people just wanted, to include kind of a very sort of contemporary relevant artist in whatever, a movie soundtrack or compilation album or whatever. But it's hard to know like how much the label was pitching versus how much they were just answering the phone, but we turned down a lot of stuff. Sometimes it was just kind of hard to judge. Like, is this movie going to be good? One that we couldn't do was The Crow. Remember that one with Bruce Lee's son?
Yeah.
The one he died on during filming?
I think he did. Yeah.
Yes.
It's crazy. Yeah. So, I mean, that would have been a cool one, but, it was just one of like 20 things that was flying around at the time. And,
I see.
If the band was on the road and maybe the advance wasn't substantial, wasn't enough to kind of get our attention based on how busy they already were, it could have, like, I've said this before, I know on here, but like, like how many interviews is Les going to do every day before the gig? How many radio stations are you going to take the time to like go over to the station after sound check to do, the interview, or much less wake up early or do some cheesy promotional gimmick, So you're just weighing like all this stuff and like when you're on the road. And, I remember Les saying to me back in those days that it was actually easier for him to do more press when he was on the road. Cause at least he's like kind of in work mode and he's just kind of out there. And if he's got free time based on a daily schedule, he was pretty happy to put some time into doing interviews or whatever, photo shoots. But when he's home, it's kind of a special time to not be doing all that stuff. So it's kind of harder, to get him to do like one interview in a month when he was at home versus like 3 in a day on the road, There's
a sanctity to that makes sense to me. I wouldn't want to mix those two things. If you're already on the road, you're already working.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Okay. So you guys said yes to Beavis and Butthead, which is a great idea. They were just massive at the time. So much so that I wasn't allowed to watch them when I went over to friends' houses who had cable. So I didn't see them for years. And I didn't have cable either. So that was a non-starter. I believe Bastardizing You Like It came later, because it sounds like it was recorded at Les's place in Berkeley where he recorded the Sausage Record. I'm not asking you to tell me this like in no uncertain terms, but that's what it sounds like to me, that it was recorded later on. They had to get together to knock that one out for that Airheads soundtrack. So at some point they had to jump into Les's house and make that happen after somebody said yes.
Yeah, hard to remember the timing of all these different projects. Yeah, it's just random, like what we wind up I mean, obviously, again, like Beavis and Butthead, you want to support that. I mean, they played probably Mud and Crinkle.
Mm-hmm. I remember them playing DMV. I did see an episode where they played DMV as well.
So then they must have done all three of those. Yeah. They did the Riddles Are Abound Tonight.
Which, of course, spawned the Great Cornholio, which is a great feather in one's cap.
God, it's incredible. They did the Merv video.
Oh, that's right. Yes, they did do the Shave My Face Off.
Yeah. Obviously, they were very supportive of everything we were doing at the time.
And how did that come about? I don't know who chose the videos for Beavis and Butthead, or if, of course, they have to reach out and say, hey, can we use your video?
Yeah, and it was just random. I mean, there was a very heavy video promotion part of the label world. We had a pretty great guy at Interscope for many years named Jeff Anderson, who was a friend of mine for a long time. I lost track of him, though, maybe 10 years ago or less. But he was great. He was very much in that world. I think he became an A&R guy. I worked with Trent Reznor really closely for a long time. But, yeah, it's part of that whole thing, you know? I mean, I'm sure that labels are like pitching Beavis and Butthead, you know, which I'm glad they did. You know?
It's a big deal at that time. So that's really cool that came about and just got a little more play. And it wasn't after midnight, which apparently was a prerequisite for showing Primus videos for a while. So yeah, to get it on at 7 or 8 p.m. Through Beavis and Butthead is quite a nice way to sneak it in. So that's really cool that there are a lot of people who found the band through that medium. And I don't know if you have a sense of if that really gave a bump especially over the Pork Soda promotional period.
You know, we had 500,000 fans from Caesar Cheese. I don't know how long it took us to sell 500,000 copies of Pork Soda, but I mean, it certainly wasn't instantaneous. I mean, maybe we sold 125,000 in the first 2 weeks, you know, to get up in those high chart positions. But, you know, and then it was just like, you know, a lot bigger weeks for a long time than the cheese, 1 or 2,000 per week was selling. But at the end of the day, Pork Soda did go platinum, which is 1 million.
Right.
As did cheese eventually. So yeah, there's a lot of room for growth there, you know, from 500,000 to 1 million. I don't remember how long that took. I mean, I bet you they got to like 750, 800,000 on the album cycle and then kept going for a couple 100,000 more over a period of the next couple of years or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. I know it took a number of years, but it eventually got there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the band does a lot of touring in support of Pork Soda, Lollapalooza 93, some festivals in Europe, the Liquid Pig Tour in the fall of 93, opening for Rush on the Counterparts Tour spring of 94. That's a good chunk of time, and that's a lot of time on the road, so they were really working hard on that. Then there's a break, and this is where things get interesting to me, because before we talk about Sausage and Prawn Song Records, which occupied Les's attention after the Pork Soda cycle stops, they take about a 3-month break, and then they're on Woodstock 94. Do you remember how they got on the bill for Woodstock?
I asked Don Muller if he would get them on the bill.
Now, was Don hooked into that one too?
He had no official role, but, you know, if you're the organizers of Woodstock 94, you're basically buying whatever Don Muller is selling, you know? I specifically remember calling him up and saying, I'm hearing about this festival. Do you think we can get on it? And he's like, well, I mean, isn't Les going out with that other band now during that time? And I'm like, we'll figure it out, you know? You know, I don't know if somebody in the band asked me to make that call or how it happened, but that definitely happened. But yeah, I mean, the Rush thing, going back to that, was interesting because obviously we did a lot of shows with them in 92, both in the US, Canada, and Europe. And then the U2 thing happened, which we thought we weren't going to be opening for anybody anymore before that, but it was U2, so we did that.
Right.
So then when Rush called, you know, late in 93 or whatever, you know, I'm sure they're aware of Primus's ongoing success and that the band's kind of in a, you know, a different place than they were, you know, in 92. It was just like, hey, you know, if Rush is going to have an opening band, of course they would love to have Primus be that band at that point, not musically, friendship wise, you know, whatever. So it's just as simple as that. It was another, I think, 6 weeks. Whereas I think all the shows we did with them in 92 in both continents were indoors. I think for the most part anyway, like arenas.
Okay.
The 94 thing was going to be outdoors in amphitheaters, the so-called sheds of the world.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly, timing wise, if it was interrupting other things, but the idea was, well, there is this 2-week section out of the 4 or 5 or 6 weeks that, the Rush shows were going to be in, so-called secondary markets. So they were places that we hadn't been with them yet, for one thing. But so we turned down, the majority of the shows and did I think just 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, it looks like it was from late March to early April. Yeah, So just a few weeks, and you're right. Secondary markets, I see Madison, Wisconsin, Peoria, Illinois, Moline, Illinois. That's the show my dad wouldn't let me go to. Indianapolis.
It's more lucrative for Primus to do their own thing than continue to open for Rush, right?
Right. I mean, when you're an opening act, you're getting a flat fee. Obviously, like, in some phases of bands' careers, including ours, you can't even afford to pay the bills on that fee.
An opening act, yeah.
I mean, hopefully, at a certain point, if you become successful, if you really are going to open for somebody, you're getting paid a decent amount of money. The thing is, when you're a headliner, not only are you making, the great majority of the income that's going to the artist that night, but you also have the opportunity on top of whatever your guaranteed fee is to make extra money. It's referred to as the back end or the bonus or the percentage, which is basically a percentage of a net profit if a show does really well, or certainly if it sells out. All the expenses.
You get none of that.
Yeah.
You just get your flat fee and that's it.
Yeah. So yeah.
The crew and the band gets nothing at the end of the day.
Yeah. So as a headliner, you have the opportunity to not only make all the money that you're going on the road with a guarantee of making, but if the shows do well, you could wind up making, whatever, 20% more, something like that, maybe more than that. So that's always nice when that happens.
Yeah, for sure. So sounded like it's just, let's just jump on Rush for a couple of weeks and see our buddies again and see these secondary markets, and maybe somebody will run out and buy pork soda afterwards.
Exactly.
Okay. And I want to go back to the Woodstock thing because they hadn't played together for 3 months prior. Les is off doing sausage. The other guys are doing what they're doing. Herb's doing laundry. Did you yourself, after it had been booked, did you have any worries given that they hadn't played together for so long and were in this prime slot in front of hundreds of thousands?
I don't think I really thought about that part of it so much. Okay. I do remember being on the same flight as Lur and Tim, probably Derek Featherstone, who was in first class.
You guys weren't.
Those guys probably all were, but I definitely wasn't. But yeah, I mean, I think Tim was like maybe doing some stick work, on the plane.
Nice.
So, I don't really remember thinking too much about that. I think it was more of like the weird interaction of like, for Les to kind of come out of this project that he's deep into at that point with Sausage.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, how about the crazy fact that like Jay Lane had to miss half that tour and Brain filled in for him?
Right. The last couple of weeks. Right.
I know all about that.
Oh my God. So yeah, I mean, that was a great, great experience. I mean, so many bands and artists that I love were on that bill. Not to mention the fact that I stuck around for the second day after Primus left. And, Derek Featherstone was already part of Ultrasound at the time, which was, originally the Grateful Dead sound company. They were basically running the production on the second stage out of, I don't know, 3 or 4 stages. And so like the monitor world, for that second stage was just run by our friends. And I was able to just stay there, the whole next day and just watch,
Nice.
Some of my favorite artists, the Neville Brothers, I remember specifically playing, and then here's an interesting story that I'm sure I've said before, which is that the artist playing before Primus, at least as scheduled, was the band, without Robbie Robertson. But it was not only just the rest of the guys who, well, I think one of them had passed away, Richard Manuel. by that point. But yeah, so it was like 3 out of the 5 guys, but they had this whole extended horn section, sort of like some of their classic live records of the 70s, which was really cool because it was a lot of New York City guys. And here we were in upstate New York, kind of close to the town of Woodstock. Whereas the original Woodstock Festival, which I know that area really well because my parents are from around there, was not actually that close to the town of Woodstock. They wound up doing Woodstock in 1969 in the Catskill Mountains, but it was at a different spot. Woodstock 94 was actually in the town one over from the town of Woodstock. And that was the first time I met Tony Levin from King Crimson and Peter Gabriel. On that second day, Peter Gabriel was playing, and I'm sitting at catering, and here comes Tony Levin walking down. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. I went over and talked to him, and he wound up getting his lunch and sitting down and hanging with us. And he actually lived in the town of Woodstock and still does to this day.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah. I was talking about the band, who's had a lot of history in Woodstock. They lived there back in the late 60s. They were backing Bob Dylan, who lived in Woodstock, As their set is winding down, it suddenly becomes clear that Bob Weir and Rob Wasserman are hanging out, and they're not on the bill, which is really weird because, like, you'd think if J-Ski was like busy with something, wouldn't it be with Bob Weir and Rob Wasserman?
Yeah.
But no, he wasn't even there. So we were asked if we would allow Bob Weir and Rob Wasserman, who had been a duo up to that point outside the Dead, to perform, at the time that Primus was scheduled to go on at like the biggest festival I think that we'd ever done at that point.
Yeah.
And so what are you going to say? No. So we did that. And somehow I don't think it shortened the set length. Was it that same day that Green Day had played earlier, or was it the following day?
The Green Day set was of epic proportions.
I think it was the next day.
But there definitely was a mud fight during My Name is Mud.
Totally.
Oh, sure.
We still have the cabinets that Les used on that stage. The Mesa Boogie 215s, there's one of them has a big splotch of mud on it. Yeah. And Les is like, don't ever clean it. Don't ever touch it. Put it in the case and put it in storage. I was like, no, that's Woodstock mud. I said, gotcha.
Wow.
Primus played on the South Stage on Saturday. Green Day played on the South Stage on Sunday, the 14th.
Oh,
so the
okay.
Day after.
So it was the next
Different
day.
days.
I definitely got there right after Green Day played on whatever day. So, and I was hanging out, just kind of camped out on that second stage, and was kind of anybody that was from the Bay Area at that festival wound up playing the second stage because of the connection with ultrasound, I assume. Yeah. So you had Green Day, you had Bob Weir, you had Primus. So that was interesting. I mean, I missed some of my favorite artists of all time. I've gone back and watched the videos on YouTube of Traffic did a reunion tour at that time with Steve Winwood. Mm-hmm. And then Gil Scott-Heron played. I had no idea that was even happening at the time.
I remember when I learned that, I was shocked, and I can't believe he didn't make it onto that soundtrack that they eventually released. And of course, Primus was on.
I'm going to side shoot here a funny moment. I was telling some friends on the Roger tour, they asked about Primus, and there was that one festival we did in Germany. Can't remember what it was called. God damn it, with Brain. And they do The Awakening with Brain, and there's all this smoke and this funky tent. And we get done doing the Primus set, and it was the first tour of Brown Album we did with Brain. And we get off the stage, and we go back into the trailer area, and who's next after us is Steve Winwood. Me and Seth Nealand and Primus 3 dudes are walking back to get to our little trailer, and we're like crisscrossed with Steve Winwood and his entourage going to the stage, right? And it was like, whoa, hey, whoa, stop. Hey, this Primus, Steve Winwood. We were all like, Steve fucking Winwood, dude. Hey, dude. Put our hands out. He's like, mates, you guys were fucking awesome. I just watched the set. It was great. All right, we're going to the stage. And then we all were like, oh, cool. It was total Spinal Tap, like total maker. He watched Primus, dude.
Oh, yeah? Well, that's interesting. Is there any chance that the band Fish was on that same festival?
They were. I think they played earlier on the day before, maybe.
Because I had a hilarious moment at the first Bonnaroo in 2002 when we were about to do the very first performance of Bucket of Bernie Brains ever, in addition to, Frogs. Steve Winwood was a surprise guest with Widespread Panic.
Oh.
He sort of lived in the area in Tennessee, even though he's British. And Adrian Belew was a surprise appearance. He didn't actually get on any stages that same weekend. So I'm sitting with Bernie, and I see Adrian Belew, and I'm like, "Hey, Bernie, this is in catering. Weren't you in Talking Heads with Adrian Belew?" He's like, "Yeah, why?" I'm like, "There he is over there." So he goes over and puts his head on Adrian's shoulder and pops his dentures out the way he used to always do. So then we're hanging out, and me and Bernie see Steve Winwood. Me and Bernie go over to talk to Steve Winwood. Somehow in the conversation, Steve Winwood is saying how inspiring the jam band scene is to him. And I'm saying, I'm the manager of Primus. And he's like, "Yeah, I was at some festival in Europe, and I remember seeing Primus. And I also saw Fish for the first time. And man, was I so inspired." So I wonder if that was the festival.
Oh,
You know what? I don't think it was, because we did a bunch of festivals on that Brown tour. That was 97, I think. And we hooked up with Fish guys, maybe another festival where the Cardigans played, and L7 and some stuffs, and 311. And Fish were in the tent on the side stage the next festival we did. Huh. The one I'm talking about was like, it was weird. It was like the built-in crowd, didn't matter who played, old people. Grandma and Grandpa were there with their wine bottles and their baskets, and Primus played Tommy the Cat. Just like, they're like, Grandma's going, "Whoa, cool, nice music, man. I like this." It wasn't one of those field of people bouncing up and down to Tommy the Cat.
Wow. Woodstock 94 was definitely like another moment where it just kind of helped cement Primus's, participation in the, not necessarily the mainstream, but sort of, the mainstream of the alternative, if you will. I mean, it was part of the culture of the time. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
Dude, that was a very memorable performance, incredible performance that they hadn't played in so long, and Les jumped off of the sausage tour, and Tim and Lur showed up, and they had no rehearsal, and they nailed it,
Yeah. I mean, one other interesting thing about just the logistics of getting in and out of that thing on that day was that I think the town was called Saugerties, New York, east of Woodstock, which was right on the west side of the Hudson River. And obviously the Hudson River defines, such a big part of the state of New York. On the east side of the Hudson River, right at that same point, was the campus of a school called Bard College.
I know that name. Yep.
My girlfriend at the time was a graduate of, and she was with me there. And a lot of famous people went there. Mike Yauk, the Beasties, was a classmate of hers. And then back in the early days, Becker and Fagan, the Steely Dan guys, went there. So that song, "My Old School," that's about Bard College. Chevy Chase was their drummer.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. The point is that the way that we got into the festival was to take a helicopter from the Bard College campus over the river, and there was a helicopter landing pad somewhere on site at the festival. That was the only time I've ever ridden a helicopter professionally. I think I did one as a sightseeing thing in Hawaii, and that was it.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that was pretty cool. And then at the end of the day, when we're leaving, it was kind of a thunderstorm. It wasn't terrible, but it was bad enough that they were like, "No more helicopters.
Oh, okay.
You're taking a boat across the river."
Right.
But none of this was with Les and the Sausage Guys. They came in on a bus and went right in, and it was me, Derek, maybe Trows. I guess Trows wasn't on the Sausage tour. I don't know. Lur.
Brain was on it at that point, wasn't he?
Yeah. I have a photo of Trows getting into the helicopter, and it was crazy, crazy stuff.
Probably didn't take too many boats to gigs either, I imagine.
No.
That definitely makes it special. And I think that's actually a decent place to pause, but we have this pork soda cycle. The band is really they're almost to the top of the mountain as far as terms of popularity and recognition in the world of music in the 90s. This record, even though it's a lot looser in spots than the previous two studio full-length releases, really struck a chord with people, and a lot of people ran out and bought it. and they're going to the shows, and it must have just been a really exciting time. Because Soya, you use that metaphor of the snowball, but by now it's a boulder-sized snowball. It's just rolling.
Woodstock Performance really built it even bigger, Dave.
Yeah.
MTV welcomed every moment of that My Name is Mud or whatever the fuck that song was that MTV started playing. It's like, whoo.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously that sausage video was a pretty amazing thing, on that album, which was another Mark Core thing at the Masonic Temple in Oakland.
Right.
Highest ceiling ever to fit that crane that could go up and down that structure. And Todd was getting electrocuted.
Right. That story.
The light bulb thing that was coming off of those guys. And obviously, the Jay Lane legend continues to grow to this day, with him being in Dead and Company now and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was a really great period of time. How crazy is that Les wanted to showcase the original band with the original songs, after he became popular with obviously a version of the same band that people liked a lot more than that old version. You know what I mean?
The only song on the Sausage record that would resonate with new fans was Toys Are Go Winding Down.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
sure.
The version that is on that record is nothing like what's on the Frizzle Fry or what we all knew before even the Sausage demo came out,
Right.
Yeah.
If you're game, Dave, next time I do want to ask you about the Prawn Song Records years and that Sausage cycle and how it determined the path for Primus going forward, because there was a sizable gap there. And, we do know that Sausage could have continued, and that could have affected the Primus momentum that ended up becoming Tales from the Punch Bowl. But that is a really interesting time period. I'd love to pick your brain about it at a future date.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we're going to set that aside because, like you just asked a minute ago about how exciting it was with all the success and everything like that. And like, for me, a big part of that was this other thing, which was a label that I co-owned with Les.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as Les had specific ideas about, why to have a label and who was going to be on it, I wound up having some significant input on who was going to be on it, set it all up on a business level, kind of ran it, oversaw that stuff. And that was a rare time for me.
I definitely want to hear about that because we've talked about those Prawn Song releases, but I would love to hear your experience. And did Jay Lane get an ownership stake, considering he's on half the records on that label?
Yeah.
Dave Lefkowitz, you are the heaviest of the heavies. Thank you so much for stopping by, talking to Soya and myself, and illuminating us on the Pork Soda era, which was indeed, they're all important in their own way for shaping the story of this band, but this one really turned it up to 11, and we're going to see what happens going forward.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate it. Always good to talk to you guys.
Thank you, David.
Dave. Love you, brother.
See you, man.